Cole Bennett sat in a bar on Titan Station, nursing a drink that tasted like engine coolant, and watching cargo ships drift past the window. He had been out of work for 3 months. 3 months of cheap food, recycled air, and the slow drain of a savings account that had never been fat to begin with. He was a soldier without a war, and that made him the most useless thing in the galaxy. His communicator buzzed. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the name on the screen and sat up a little straighter. Lena Marsh, Earth's diplomatic envoy to half the known galaxy, and the only person who had ever made Cole feel like he was being studied under a microscope while she smiled at him. He answered, "Marsh. Bennett, you look terrible. You can't see me. I don't need to. I know what 3 months of unemployment looks like on you." Her voice was brisk and clean, the way it always was when she wanted something. "I have a job. It pays well. You'll hate the politics and love the danger." Cole leaned back in his chair. "Keep talking." She told him about the Valanthi Dominion. He already knew the basics. Everyone did. They were one of the oldest empires in the galaxy, a species that lived for thousands of years, built cities out of crystal and light, and looked at humans the way humans looked at puppies, small, loud, and not expected to last very long. The Valanthi Queen had a daughter, Princess Aelith, the youngest of the royal bloodline. She was about to go on a diplomatic tour through contested space, visiting neutral stations and border worlds as a show of goodwill. The Queen wanted a human bodyguard assigned to her daughter for the duration of the trip. It was supposed to be symbolic, a gesture of trust between Earth and the Dominion. "Symbolic," Cole repeated. "That's what they're calling it. And what are you calling it?" Lena paused. "An opportunity for both of us." "Earth needs this relationship to work, Cole. The Valanthi control half the trade routes in the Eastern Arm. If this goes well, we get access. If it goes badly, we get nothing. And if something actually happens to the princess, then you make sure it doesn't." Cole took the job. 2 weeks later, he stood in a docking bay on the Valanthi homeworld, staring up at the royal cruiser Throne of Sylvis. It was enormous. It looked less like a ship and more like a cathedral that someone had taught to fly. Its hull was pale silver, etched with patterns that glowed faintly in the light, and it hummed with a deep, quiet energy that Cole could feel in his chest. A squad of Valanthi royal guards stood at the base of the boarding ramp, watching him approach. They were tall. All Valanthi were tall. Their skin ranged from deep violet to soft lavender, and their eyes were silver and gold, and colors that didn't have names in any human language. They wore armor that looked like it had been grown rather than built, and they carried plasma lances that could cut through a bulkhead like paper. The one in front was the tallest. His name was Commander Rethick, and he looked at Cole the way someone might look at a stain on an expensive rug. "You are the human," Rethick said. It wasn't a question. "Last time I checked," Cole said. Rethick's jaw tightened. He turned without another word and walked up the ramp. Cole followed, and the guards fell in behind him like a cage closing. The inside of the ship was even more impressive than the outside. The corridors were wide and curved, lined with a material that felt like polished stone but was warm to the touch. Light came from everywhere and nowhere, soft and golden. The air smelled clean in a way that made Cole realize he had been breathing recycled garbage for most of his adult life. They brought him to his quarters, a small room near the princess's wing. It was simple by Valanthi standards, which meant it was the nicest room Cole had ever slept in. He dropped his bag on the bed, checked the exits, and pulled up the ship's layout on his datapad. He spent the next 2 hours studying it. Every corridor, every junction, every maintenance hatch and emergency seal. He noted the guard rotation schedules, the gaps between shifts, the blind spots in the sensor coverage. There were more of them than he liked. He sent a message to Danny Voss, his old squadmate, who was trailing the cruiser in their escort frigate, the Pale Horse. Danny had been with Cole since basic training, through 2 wars and more bar fights than either of them could count. He was loud, irreverent, and the best pilot Cole had ever known. "How's the luxury cruise?" Danny's voice crackled through the comm. "The guards hate me. The ship is beautiful. The security has holes I could drive a truck through. So, Tuesday, keep your eyes open out there. Something about this doesn't sit right." Copy that. Voss out. Cole met the princess the next morning. Aelith Vorsan was young by Valanthi standards, which probably still made her older than Cole's entire family tree. She was shorter than the other Valanthi he had seen, with lavender skin and silver eyes that were wide and curious, and full of a warmth that caught him off guard. She wore a simple gown instead of armor, and when she saw him, she smiled like he was the most interesting thing she had seen in years. "You are Cole Bennett," she said. "You are human." "Yes, Your Highness." "Is it true that humans only live for 80 years? If we're lucky." Her eyes went wide. "That is so sad. What do you do with so little time?" Cole thought about it. "We rush." She laughed. It was a bright, honest sound, and several of the guards nearby stiffened at the informality of it. But Aelith didn't seem to care. She asked him about Earth. She asked about the oceans, the mountains, the way the sky changed color at sunset. She asked about human food and human music and human wars, and Cole answered as honestly as he could. She listened to everything with the kind of attention that made you feel like your words actually mattered. Over the next few days, Cole settled into a routine. He walked with the princess when she moved through the ship. He stood outside her door when she was in her quarters. He ate alone in the crew galley because the royal dining hall made him feel like a zoo exhibit. The guards continued to ignore him, which was better than the open hostility he had expected. Rethik watched him constantly, but said nothing. It was the silence of a man waiting for a mistake. Cole made sure not to give him one. On the 4th night, as the throne of Silvas moved through a quiet stretch of space between systems, Cole was reviewing sensor logs in his quarters when something caught his eye. A brief contact on the long-range array, a ship, or something shaped like a ship, at the very edge of detection range. It appeared for 6 seconds, then vanished. He flagged it and sent it to the bridge. The response came back within minutes. Sensor ghost, likely debris or radiation echo. No action required. Cole stared at the screen for a long time. In his experience, things that appeared and disappeared at the edge of your sensors were never debris. They were never echoes. They were always something worse. He sent a copy of the data to Danny on the Pale Horse with a single note attached. Calyx Point was the kind of place that tried very hard to look neutral. It floated in the dead space between 3 territories, a massive station built from the bones of older stations, covered in trade signs and diplomatic flags, and the quiet desperation of people trying to get along. It was beautiful, in the way that a mask is beautiful. You just had to wonder what was underneath. The throne of Silvas docked at the station's royal berth, and the princess's delegation prepared for the cultural exchange ceremony. It was supposed to be a simple event: speeches, gifts, polite applause, the kind of thing that looked good on broadcasts and meant very little in practice. Cole didn't like it. He had told Rethik as much during the morning briefing. The venue is too open. The guest list is too long. There are 6 points of entry, and only 2 of them are covered by your rotation. Rethik had looked at him with the calm patience of a man who had been doing his job for 400 years. The Royal Guard has protected this bloodline since before your species learned to build fire. We do not require tactical advice from a human mercenary. Bodyguard, Cole corrected. The difference escapes me. Cole let it go. There was no point in arguing with a wall, especially one that outranked him. Instead, he did what he always did. He prepared anyway. He walked the venue 3 times before the ceremony began. He mapped the exits. He identified the structural supports, the choke points, the places where someone could hide, and the places where someone could run. He positioned himself 2 steps behind the princess, and 1 step to her left, close enough to reach her in half a second. Aelith stood at the center of a wide hall, filled with delegates from a dozen species. She spoke about unity and understanding, and the bridge between old worlds and new ones. She was good at it. Her voice was steady and warm, and the crowd listened with genuine interest. Cole wasn't listening. He was watching. He watched the crowd. He watched the doors. He watched the Volanthi guards standing at their posts with their plasma lances held at the formal carry position, which meant they would need a full 1.5 seconds to bring them to bear if something went wrong. A 1.5 seconds was a lifetime in a fight. At exactly the halfway point of Aelith's speech, the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a brownout. Every light, every screen, every system in the hall died at once. The electromagnetic pulse hit like a silent thunderclap, killing power across the entire section of the station. The crowd erupted in confusion. Voices overlapped in a dozen languages. Someone screamed. Cole didn't move. He stood perfectly still in the darkness, and he listened. There, just beneath the noise of the panicking crowd, a faint magnetic hum, almost too quiet to hear. He knew that sound. Cloaked combat armor, military grade, the kind of thing that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Used by people who killed for a living. He counted the hums, 6 of them, moving in formation through the crowd toward the stage where Aelith stood frozen. Cole grabbed her arm. She gasped. "Stay behind me," he said. "Don't speak. Don't stop." He pulled her off the stage and behind a support column just as the first shot cut through the air where she had been standing. It was a plasma bolt, bright blue in the darkness, and it hit the podium and turned it to ash. The Volanthi guards reacted, but they were slow. The EMP had knocked out their targeting systems, their communication network, and the tactical overlay built into their helmets. They were fighting blind. 2 of them went down before they even got their lances up. A third fired into the dark and hit nothing. Cole pushed Aelith deeper into the shadows behind the column and stepped forward. He had his sidearm in his right hand and his combat knife in his left. His gear was old, analog, and completely unaffected by the EMP. He had always preferred things that didn't need a battery to work. The first assassin came around the column fast and low. Cole shot him in the chest at point-blank range. The plasma bolt punched through the cloaking field and the armor beneath it, and the assassin dropped without a sound. The second one was right behind. Cole sidestepped the blade that came at his throat, and drove his knife into the gap between the helmet and the chestplate. The assassin made a wet, choked sound, and fell. Cole moved. He kept Aelith behind him, one hand gripping her wrist, pulling her through the chaos toward the nearest exit. A bolt grazed his ribs, and he felt the skin split open, the heat biting deep. But he didn't slow down. Pain was just information. It meant he was still alive. A third assassin appeared in the corridor ahead. Cole fired twice. The first shot hit the shoulder. The second hit the faceplate. The assassin crumpled. His communicator crackled. Danny's voice, strained and fast. "Cole, I'm in the station's backup grid. I can get you partial power in 30 seconds, maybe. Make it 20. I'll try." Cole kept moving. The corridor branched and he took the left path because it led toward the docking bays and away from the crowd. A fourth assassin dropped from a ceiling vent and landed on top of him. They hit the floor together. The assassin's blade came down and sliced across his forearm, opening a cut that bled freely. Cole caught the next strike with his knife, twisted, and drove his elbow into the assassin's throat. He followed it with the knife, and then it was over. The lights flickered. Then they came on, dim and orange, emergency power only. Enough to see by, enough to find the docking bay, at the end of the corridor. Cole dragged himself up, grabbed Aelith's hand, and ran. She was shaking, but she was keeping up, her silver eyes wide, and her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She ran, and Cole respected her for it. They reached the docking bay. Cole sealed the door behind them, jammed the lock with a maintenance tool, and then stood with his back against the wall, and his knife in his hand, and waited. The remaining 2 assassins hit the door 3 times. They couldn't get through. Minutes later, Refik and what was left of the royal guard arrived and secured the corridor outside. By the time they opened the door, Cole was sitting on the floor with his back against a cargo crate, bleeding from 3 wounds, holding a knife that was no longer clean. Aelith was beside him, unharmed. She was holding his free hand in both of hers, and she was crying quietly, not from fear, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization of how close she had come to dying, and how much this strange human had given to stop it. Refik stood in the doorway and stared. He looked at the blood on the floor, the knife in Cole's hand, and the princess sitting safe and whole beside a man who had nearly died for her. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Cole looked up at Refik, then at Aelith, and then at the ceiling. His ribs burned. He was tired in a way that went deeper than muscle and bone. "You're welcome," he said. And then he closed his eyes. Back on the pale horse, Danny Voss leaned back in his chair and let out a breath he had been holding for 10 minutes. The station's power grid hummed back to life around him, system by system, like a heartbeat returning. He opened a channel to Lena Marsh on Earth. "Ambassador, you might want to sit down. What happened? Your symbolic gesture just killed 4 people with a knife." The footage arrived on the Queen's personal console before the Throne of Silvus had even cleared the Calyx Point docking ring. It came flagged as urgent, classified at the highest level, and marked with Refik's personal seal. Seraphine Vorsayan opened it alone, in the quiet of her private chambers, with the lights dimmed and the door sealed. She watched it once without expression. Then she watched it again, and then a 3rd time, slower, pausing at certain moments, studying them the way a sculptor studies stone before making the first cut. She watched the human move, not the way her guards moved, with centuries of training and the weight of tradition behind every step. He moved like something desperate and alive, like an animal that knew it was mortal and fought because of it, not in spite of it. She watched him take the first hit across his ribs and keep running. She watched him kill 2 assassins in close quarters with a blade, while shielding her daughter with his body. She watched him drag himself through a corridor, on legs that were failing, bleeding from wounds that would have put a Volanthi soldier in medical stasis. And she watched him seal a door and stand in front of it with a knife, and refuse to fall. She had ruled for over 2,000 years. She had seen battles and betrayals, and the slow, grinding politics of empire. She had watched warriors who had trained for centuries break under pressure. She had buried heroes and forgiven cowards, and learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. She had never seen anything like Cole Bennett. When the Throne of Silvus returned to the Volanthi homeworld 3 days later, the court was in an uproar. News of the attack had spread despite every attempt to contain it. The noble houses were furious. The military council demanded answers. Refik faced a formal inquiry into the failure of the royal guard, and the commander accepted it with the rigid, silent dignity of a man who knew he had no defense. Cole spent those 3 days in the ship's medical bay. The Volanthi doctors treated his wounds with technology that made human medicine look like finger painting. The plasma burn across his ribs healed in hours. The knife wound on his forearm closed in a day. The deeper damage, the exhaustion, the stress fractures in his hands from fighting in close quarters, took a little longer. Aelith visited him every day, She brought him things from the ship's garden, small flowers with petals that changed color in the light, and she sat beside his bed and talked. She told him about her childhood, about growing up in a palace that was older than most human civilizations, about a mother who loved her fiercely, but showed it in ways that were hard to see if you didn't know where to look. He was good at listening. It was one of the few skills that didn't require him to hit anything. On the day the ship reached the homeworld, Cole expected to be debriefed, thanked, paid, and sent on his way. The job was done. The princess was safe. There was no reason for him to stay. Instead, a guard he didn't recognize came to his quarters and told him that the queen wished to see him. Not in the throne room, not in a formal audience, in her private chambers. Cole cleaned up, put on the least wrinkled clothes he had, and followed the guard through corridors he hadn't been allowed to enter before. The deeper parts of the palace were quieter and older, built from a pale stone that seemed to glow from within. The air smelled like something sweet and unfamiliar, like a memory of a garden he had never visited. The queen's chambers were not what he expected. He had imagined something grand, something designed to overwhelm. Instead, the room was simple. A wide window looked out over a valley filled with silver trees. The furniture was elegant but comfortable. There were books, actual physical books, stacked on a table beside a chair that had clearly been sat in many times. Seraphine stood by the window. She was tall, even by Valanthe standards. Her skin was a deep violet, darker than her daughter's, and her eyes were gold. She wore no crown, no armor, no symbols of rank, just a simple gown in a shade of blue that humans didn't have a name for. She turned when he entered, and Cole felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't fear, it wasn't intimidation. It was the sudden, unexpected sense that he was standing in front of someone who could see straight through him. "Cole Bennett," she said. Her voice was lower than Aelith's, richer, with a warmth beneath it that felt deliberate, like a fire someone had chosen to light. "Your Majesty. Sit, please." She sat across from him, close enough that he could see the faint lines of light that traced the veins beneath her skin, a trait of the royal bloodline that marked her as something more than ordinary. She didn't talk about politics. She didn't talk about the attack in strategic terms, or the inquiry, or the diplomatic fallout. She asked him what it had felt like. "In the dark," she said. "When the lights went out, and you heard them coming, what did you feel?" Cole was quiet for a moment. He could have given her the soldier's answer, the professional answer, the one that sounded clean and controlled. But something about the way she looked at him made him tell the truth. "I was afraid," he said. "I'm always afraid. I just don't let it make the decisions." She studied him. Her gold eyes moved across his face like she was reading something written there in a language only she understood. "My guards train for centuries. They swear oaths that bind their bloodlines for generations. They dedicate their entire existence to the protection of this throne. And yet when the moment came, it was you, a man who lives for less than a century, who carries no oath, who was hired for a symbolic gesture. You did what none of them could. They would have gotten there eventually. I was just closer. You are being modest. I'm being honest." The corner of her mouth lifted. It was not quite a smile, but it was close, and it changed her entire face. She looked younger. She looked real. She told him about the life debt. In Valanthe culture, when someone shed blood to protect a member of the royal family, the crown owed them a debt that could not be repaid with money or titles. It was old, older than the empire itself, rooted in a time when the Valanthe were still a tribal people, and blood was the only currency that mattered. "The traditional way to honor this debt," Seraphine said, "is to offer the protector a permanent bond to the throne. Not as a servant, not as a guard. As someone who stands beside the crown, who speaks with its voice, who is trusted above all others. Cole felt the weight of what she was saying settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. You're offering me a permanent position. I am offering you a place. Here. With us. With me. The last two words were quieter than the rest, and Cole heard them clearly. He didn't answer right away. He sat with it. He looked at the silver trees outside the window, and the gold light in her eyes, and the quiet, enormous gravity of what was happening. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course." He stood. Then he stopped and turned back. "Your Majesty." "Yes?" "Your daughter is one of the kindest people I've ever met. You should know that." Something moved behind Seraphine's eyes. Something soft and unguarded that she probably didn't let many people see. "I know," she said. "She gets it from her father. He died a long time ago." Cole nodded. He didn't say he was sorry, because he could tell she didn't want that. He just nodded and left, and walked back to his quarters, through the glowing corridors of a palace that suddenly felt less foreign than it had that morning. He called Lena Marsh that night. "She offered me a bond to the throne," he said. Lena was quiet for 5 full seconds. "Cole, listen to me carefully. This isn't a job offer. This is politics, and maybe something else." "I know." "Do you?" Cole accepted the Queen's offer on a Tuesday morning, standing in the same quiet room with the same silver trees outside the window. Seraphine didn't smile when he told her. She just looked at him with those gold eyes and said, "Good," and the single word carried more weight than any speech Cole had ever heard. The ceremony was brief and ancient. Seraphine spoke words in the old Volanthi tongue, while Cole knelt before her in the throne room. She placed her hand on his shoulder and pressed a small crystal pendant into his palm. It was warm, and it pulsed with a faint light that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. A bonding seal. It marked him as hers, as the throne's protector, as someone who stood outside the normal chain of command and answered only to the crown. The court watched in silence. Some of the noble faces held curiosity. Most held something colder. Cole stood and felt the eyes of every Volanthi in the room pressing against him like a physical force. He was the first human to ever hold this title. He was also the first protector in living memory who hadn't been born on Volanthi soil. The whispers began before he even left the chamber. He ignored them. He had work to do. The attack at Calyx Point still bothered him. Not the violence itself, but the precision of it. The assassins had known the guard rotation. They had known the sensor frequencies. They had known exactly when and where to deploy the electromagnetic pulse for maximum effect. That kind of intelligence didn't come from outside. It came from someone who had access to the royal security network. There was a traitor inside the palace. Cole was sure of it. He started digging quietly. He reviewed communication logs, access records, and personnel files. He cross-referenced the guard schedules with the timing of the attack, and found discrepancies that shouldn't have existed. Certain files had been accessed from a terminal in the advisory wing 3 days before the ceremony at Calyx Point. The access codes belonged to a senior court advisor named Falric. Cole didn't go to Rethic with this. Not yet. The commander was still raw from the inquiry, and his pride was a wound that hadn't closed. Cole needed more than suspicion. He needed proof. In the meantime, he settled into the palace. It was not easy. The royal guard watched him with a mixture of resentment and reluctant curiosity. During training exercises, Rethic made a point of pairing Cole against the best fighters in the guard, clearly hoping to expose human weakness. Cole lost more bouts than he won. The Volanthi were faster, stronger, and had reflexes sharpened by centuries of practice. But Cole didn't need to beat them. He needed to survive them. And surviving was something humans were very good at. He adapted. He learned their patterns. He found the gaps between their techniques where speed and instinct could make up for the difference in raw power. He never won cleanly, but he never stayed down either. A few of the younger guards began to nod at him in the corridors. It wasn't friendship, but it was something. Rethik noticed. His jaw tightened each time Cole got back up from the training floor, bruised and bleeding, but standing. The commander said nothing, but Cole could see the calculation behind his silver eyes. Rethik was trying to decide what Cole was, and none of the answers fit neatly into the categories he understood. The Queen made things more complicated. She found reasons to keep Cole close. She invited him to council sessions where security matters were discussed, asking for his perspective with a directness that made the advisors uncomfortable. She sought his opinion on threat assessments and border disputes, and she listened when he spoke, which was something the advisors noticed and resented. But it was the quiet moments that troubled Cole the most. In the evenings, after the court had emptied and the palace grew still, Seraphine would sometimes ask him to walk with her through the gardens. They talked about small things at first, the differences between human and Volanthi food, the way Earth's sky looked during a storm, the sound of rain, which the Volanthi homeworld didn't have because its weather was controlled. Then the conversations grew deeper. She told him about the loneliness of ruling for 2,000 years, of watching generations of advisors and guards grow old and be replaced while she remained. She told him about her husband, who had died in a war that most of the galaxy had already forgotten, and about the way grief changes shape over centuries, but never truly disappears. Cole listened the way he always did, quietly, fully, without trying to fix anything. He told her about Earth, about growing up in a small town where the biggest worry was whether the harvest would come in on time, about joining the military because he didn't know what else to do with himself, about the friends he had lost and the ones he had kept, and the thin, fragile line between the two. She looked at him during these conversations with an expression he couldn't quite name. It was more than curiosity. It was something careful and deliberate, like she was choosing to let herself feel something she had been holding back for a very long time. Aelith saw it before anyone else. The princess watched her mother and Cole from a distance, and one evening she found Cole alone in the corridor and stopped him. "She likes you," Aelith said, "not as a protector, as a person. Your mother is my queen. I serve the throne." Aelith tilted her head, the way she did when she thought someone was being deliberately stupid. "My mother has had servants for 2,000 years. She doesn't look at servants the way she looks at you." Cole didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, which Aelith seemed to find both frustrating and amusing. The proof Cole needed came 3 weeks into his investigation. He traced a series of encrypted communications from Thalric's terminal to an external relay node in the Outer Territories. The messages contained detailed information about royal security protocols, sensor configurations, and the princess's travel itinerary. The relay node connected to a network used by a separatist faction within the Dominion, a group that wanted to fracture the Empire and carve out independent territories from the border regions. The attack on Aelith hadn't been a random act of violence. It had been a political move designed to embarrass the Queen, weaken her authority, and prove that the throne couldn't protect its own. Thalric had fed the assassins everything they needed. Cole brought the evidence to Rethik first. He did it privately, in the commander's quarters, with no audience and no witnesses. He laid the data out on the table and stepped back and let Rethik read it in silence. The commander's face went through several stages: shock, anger, shame. His own people had missed this. His own security had been compromised from within, and it had taken a human to find it. "This is thorough," Rethik said finally, and the words clearly cost him something. "It needs to be. Thalric has been on the council for 300 years. You'll need more than my word to bring him down." Rethik looked at Cole for a long time. Something changed in his expression. Not warmth, not exactly, but a grudging acknowledgement that the human standing in front of him was not the insult he had believed him to be. They took the evidence to the Queen together. Seraphine read it in silence, her gold eyes darkening with each page. When she finished, she gave a single order, and within the hour, Thalric was in custody. But they were too late to stop everything. As the guards dragged Thalric from his chambers, the advisor smiled. It was a thin, cold smile that made Cole's stomach drop. "You found me," Thalric said, looking directly at Cole. "Well done, human. But you're looking in the wrong direction." An alarm screamed through the palace. Every screen, every display, every system in the throne room lit up red. The palace defense grid, the automated turrets and barriers and lockdown protocols designed to protect the royal family, had just activated. But it wasn't protecting them. It was targeting them. Cole broke into a run toward the throne room. Behind him, he heard the deep, mechanical hum of plasma turrets spinning up from inside the walls. Thalric's failsafe had triggered. The palace itself had become the weapon, and the queen was inside. Cole hit the throne room doors at a full sprint and found them sealed. The lockdown protocol had turned the ancient chamber into a cage. Through the narrow gap between the doors, he could see the turrets. They had emerged from recessed panels in the walls and ceiling, sleek and angular, their targeting sensors glowing a steady, terrible red. They were tracking movement inside the room. Seraphine was in there. So were 6 members of her council, and a handful of guards who had been present when the alarm went off. Cole could see them through the gap, pressed against the far wall, frozen. The turrets hadn't fired yet. They were calibrating, scanning, locking on. He hit the door with his shoulder. It didn't move. The blast doors were built to withstand orbital bombardment. His shoulder was not. He opened a channel to Danny Voss. "Danny, I need you right now." Danny's voice came back immediately, sharp and focused. "I'm reading the palace defense grid from up here. The whole thing's been hijacked. Some kind of buried code in the core system. I can crack it, but it's layered. 4, maybe 5 minutes." "I don't have 5 minutes." "Then buy them." Cole looked at the sealed door. He looked at the maintenance panel beside it. He pulled out his knife, pried the panel open, and stared at the wiring behind it. Valanthi technology was generations ahead of anything human, but a door lock was still a door lock. Power flowed in, a mechanism responded, a seal held or released. He found the manual override conduit, a physical backup buried beneath the digital systems, and cut it. The door shuddered. It opened 6 inches. Not enough for a Valanthi to squeeze through. Barely enough for a human. Cole turned sideways and pushed through the gap. The metal scraped his chest and back, tearing his shirt and the skin beneath it. But he was inside. The turrets responded instantly. The nearest one swiveled toward him, its sensor array flashing from red to white. Cole threw himself behind the council table just as the first plasma bolt burned through the air where his head had been. The bolt hit the wall behind him and left a crater the size of his fist. He looked across the room. Seraphine was pressed against the base of the throne, shielded partially by its massive frame. Her gold eyes found his across the distance, and in them he saw something he hadn't expected. Not fear. Trust. "Stay down," he called to her. "What are you going to do?" "Something stupid." He pushed the council table onto its side. It was heavy, made of Valanthi stone, and it absorbed the next 2 bolts without breaking apart. He crouched behind it, breathing hard, thinking fast. The turrets were tracking movement. They would fire at anything that moved in the open. As long as Seraphine stayed behind the throne, she was partially covered. But the turrets were repositioning slowly, adjusting their angles. In another minute, they would have a clear line of fire on her position. Cole needed to draw their attention. All of it. He stood up and ran. It was the most basic, most human thing he could do. No technology, no weapon, no clever trick. Just a man running across an open room, making himself the biggest target available. The turrets tracked him. All of them. Every sensor in the room locked onto the moving target and fired. Plasma bolts cut through the air around him. hitting the floor, the walls, the columns. One caught his left shoulder and spun him sideways. The pain was blinding, a white-hot scream that ran from his shoulder to his fingertips. But his legs kept moving because his legs didn't care about pain. They only knew how to run. A second bolt hit his thigh. He stumbled. His knee hit the floor. He forced himself up and kept going, weaving between the columns, pulling the fire away from the throne, away from the queen. 3 minutes. Danny needed 3 more minutes. From outside the sealed corridor, Rethik watched through the security feed on a wall-mounted display. He saw the human running. He saw the blood, the smoke, the impossible, stubborn refusal to stop. He saw a man who weighed half as much as the lightest Valanthi guard, drawing the fire of an entire automated defense grid with nothing but his body. Rethik looked at the blast door. It was sealed. The override had been locked by the same code that had hijacked the turrets. To open it manually, someone would have to engage the physical lock mechanism. The mechanism that was currently superheated by the energy running through the compromised system. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the lock with both hands. The heat hit him immediately. His palms blistered and split. The pain was extraordinary, deeper and sharper than anything he had felt in 4 centuries of combat. He held on. He turned the mechanism with hands that were burning, and he felt the lock disengage. The door opened. Rethik's guards poured into the throne room, spreading out, using their shields to create cover positions. They couldn't shut down the turrets, but they could absorb fire. They formed a wall between the automated weapons and the queen. Inside the pale horse, Danny's fingers flew across the console. He was deep inside the palace's core system now, cutting through layers of encrypted code that had been planted years ago, buried so deep that no routine scan would have found it. He stripped them out, one by one, line by line, his eyes burning from the screen glare, and his heart hammering against his ribs. The last layer broke. The turrets went dark, every one of them, simultaneously, like candles blown out by a single breath. The targeting sensors faded from white to nothing. The hum of the charging coils wound down to silence. The throne room was still. Cole was on one knee in the middle of the floor. His left arm hung uselessly at his side. His thigh was bleeding through a burn that had gone deep enough to hit muscle. His breathing was ragged and wet, and his vision was starting to blur at the edges. But he was alive, and Seraphine was alive, and that was all that mattered. The queen moved before anyone else. She crossed the throne room floor in long, steady strides, stepping over the scorch marks and the debris, ignoring the guards and the advisors and the chaos around her. She walked straight to Cole and knelt beside him on the burned stone floor. She placed both hands on his face. The room went silent. Every guard, every noble, every advisor froze. In Valanthi culture, there were gestures that carried meaning so deep they could not be taken back. The touch of both hands to the face was the oldest of them. It was a claiming, a declaration. It said, in a language older than words, "This one is mine, and I am his, and nothing in this world or any other will change that." Seraphine spoke a single phrase in the old tongue. The words were soft, meant only for him, but the silence in the room carried them to every ear. Cole looked up at her through the haze of pain and exhaustion. Her gold eyes were steady and fierce, and completely unguarded. He had seen her as a queen. He had seen her as a ruler, as a diplomat, as a mother. But this was the first time he had seen her as just a woman, choosing something for herself. He lifted his working hand and placed it over hers. The court erupted, not in protest, not in celebration, but in the low, heavy murmur of people who had just witnessed something that would be written about for centuries. The human protector and the Valanthi queen. The shortest-lived species, and one of the oldest. It should have been impossible. It should have been absurd. but no one who had watched Cole Bennett bleed on that floor could call it anything less than earned. In the days that followed, the Separatist network was dismantled. Thalric's connections were traced, his allies arrested, and the compromised code was purged from every system in the Dominion. The border territories settled. The noble houses grumbled, but held their tongues. Rethick stood before the court with his hands bandaged, the burns still healing, and made a statement that no one expected. He acknowledged Cole's valor publicly. He called him a warrior, without qualification, without the word human attached as a disclaimer. And then he requested, formally and for the record, to serve alongside Cole rather than above him. Cole accepted with a nod. The two men had burned for the same cause, and that kind of bond doesn't require conversation. Ambassador Lena Marsh called it the most significant moment in human-Volantai relations since first contact. Then she told Cole, in a private channel, that he was absolutely terrible at staying out of trouble, and that his new position meant she was going to have to rewrite half of Earth's diplomatic protocols. She did not sound entirely unhappy about it. Danny Voss sent a message from orbit that read, "So do I call her Your Majesty or sis-in-law now?" Cole didn't reply, but he kept the message saved. On the evening after the court's formal acknowledgment, Cole stood on the balcony outside the Queen's chambers. The valley stretched out below him, silver trees catching the last light of a sun that was older than Earth itself. The air was warm and clean, and smelled like the flowers Aelith used to bring to his hospital bed. Somewhere in the distance, a city hummed with quiet life. Seraphine came to stand beside him. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She simply leaned into him, just slightly, just enough for him to feel the warmth of her shoulder against his, and they stood together in the fading light. Cole Bennett had spent his whole life ready to die for someone. Every mission, every contract, every fight had been about putting himself between danger and someone else. It was the only thing he had ever been good at, the only thing he had ever believed in. But standing here, on a world that was not his own, beside a woman who had chosen him in front of her entire civilization, he realized something that felt both small and enormous at the same time. For the first time in his life, he had a reason to stay alive. And that, in the end, was worth more than any battle he had ever won.